Hello and welcome to Byjus Exam Prep IAS. A very warm good morning to everyone. I hope all of you are doing absolutely fine. I welcome you all to today's session of the Hindu Newspaper Analysis, a place where we discuss all the important news stories from the Hindu newspaper, both from the prelims and from the mains examination point of view. Today, these are the news stories that we have taken up from the day's newspaper. We'll be first starting our discussion with a very highly debated topic in the past couple of weeks. That is the statement made by the founder of Infosys, Mr. Narayan Murthy, where he said that the youngsters must work for 70 hours a week. It has ignited a big debate around the entire country. Some people supporting him, saying that yes, this is the need of the hour, while the other people saying that no, this is harassment. We are not getting paid to work this much. So we'll be discussing the author's point of view here on this topic. Second topic is about the international law obligation in India. This is with respect to a tax liability case in India. We'll be discussing what that is. Basically, it talks about the double taxation avoidance agreement that India has signed with certain countries and what the Supreme Court has to say about that. Third topic is about Qatar. As you know, several retired Navy personnel of India have recently been given death penalty in Qatar, supposedly being involved in an espionage case. We'll be discussing what that is. Then we'll be discussing what is happening in Congo. Congo is one of those countries that remains in the news either for its minerals or for a lot of wrong reasons, including the civil war. We'll be discussing what is happening in Congo and the role that the neighboring countries such as Rwanda is playing here. From the prelims exam point of view, the Indian Air Force is all set to phase out the MiG-21 fighter jets. We'll be discussing how that plan is going on, how many squadrons are still left, who are we replacing these jets with. Then the fundamentals of how electricity is transmitted. It's a very interesting article in the Hindu newspaper. It's a very factual article about how electricity is transmitted, the role played by transformers, the role played by voltage, high voltage, low voltage, what does current actually do. And then in the end, we'll be discussing what the WHO Global TB report, the report for tuberculosis that has come out, what numbers does it tell us? Are we on track to eliminate TB or not? Let's begin with the very first article. The first article is on a topic which I'm very sure all of you would have at least heard about. So a couple of years back, Mr. Narayan Murthy, the founder of Infosys, he was giving an interview. Now in this interview, he was giving an example of how some of the countries that are right now the most advanced countries in the world, how they have grown. So if you look at his interview, he said that after the Second World War ended, countries such as Japan, Germany, all of them were devastated. How did they turn out to become so rich today? He says that the reason that these countries have turned out to be advanced and rich today as compared to the devastation that they had faced in the Second World War was that the youth in this country, the youngsters said that we will have to work extra. We won't just work for 8 hours or 10 hours a day, that is our job shift. We'll work extra for the development of the country, for nation building. So he was giving a similar example. He was saying that if India also has to go on the same path, if India also has to achieve the same goal of going ahead and achieving the level of development that we see in Japan, Germany or other developed countries, our youth has to take up the responsibility rather than being confined to the number of working hours that they are getting paid for. They should go ahead, they should accept the responsibility and work for at least 70 hours a week. This is what Mr. Narayan Murthy had said. Now obviously, when these kind of topics are discussed, there are very diverse arguments that are given in support or against this. Most of the people, the youngsters, have spoken against it, saying that this is giving rise to a culture where work is the only priority. What about the work-life balance? What about the pay? People started pointing out the low wages that are given to entry-level engineers in Infosys, so on and so forth. What is this article all about? The article here is criticizing what Mr. Narayan Murthy had said. But the article's point of view is not about the fact that we are getting low wages, etc. There are two things that the article focuses on. The first thing that the article focuses on is, if you look at the advanced economies right now, look at Germany, Japan, all the examples that Mr. Murthy had given. Those countries are now seeing a reducing number of working hours. Why? as we go ahead and enter into an era where AI, where machine learning, etc. is becoming so prevalent, that means that the number of working hours physically required by humans, that is decreasing. So if we really have to go on the path of Germany, Japan, rather than increase the number of working hours, maybe it's time to decrease the number of working hours first. The second argument that he gives, which is the larger argument, he says that this is against the principles of ILO. So International Labour Organization, the ILO, it is a UN agency that talks about the working conditions of workers around the world. The ILO prescribes 40 hours of work per week. Beyond these, you have to be given overtime, you have to be paid extra. So usually they talk about how 40 hours a week is appropriate. The author here says, by asking the people in India, by asking the youngsters to go ahead and focus on work for 70 hours a week, not just we are discriminating with our youth, we are taking away the work-life balance, but we are also going against international norms. We are also going against the labor standards that have been set by the International Labour Organization. These are the arguments that he has given. So now let's go into the details of it. The author here refutes the claim made by Mr. Murthy on 3 reasons. First reason that the author gives, it is factually incorrect to say that Germany and Japan advanced because of longer working hours. He says that the focus was not on longer working hours. In Germany, Japan post the Second World War, the focus was more on increasing the expenditure of the government and of the private sector in innovation. They focus a lot more on how to bring in new technology rather than just asking the people to work more, number one. Second argument he gives, he says that productivity increment should not only be on the shoulders of the workers. Rather than that, the big industrialists like Mr. Murthy himself, they should take up the responsibility to spend more money in innovation. Why do you expect a person to run around 70 hours a week? Why can you not say that rather than that, we will evolve in such a manner, we will innovate, we will have such kind of technology where presence of the individual is not required. Rather, the same work can be done by machines, can be done by AI, etc. Third argument that he gives is the ILO argument. He says that the ILO, International Labour Organization, sets up the international labour standards, which talks about the decent work agenda, which talks about how many working hours there should be, and all of these suggestions are contrary to this. Interestingly, he says that this has also put India's image into danger. Why? See, when a country like India tries to sign a free trade agreement with, let's say, EU, European Union, or the US, they make it a point to check what are the working conditions in India. They only sign free trade agreements with those countries with which they are satisfied that the working condition of the workers in these countries are fine, that the countries are making sure that their obligations to the international laws are fulfilled. If India does not fulfill the obligations of the ILO and we force our workers to work extra hours, that means we are putting our free trade agreement negotiations in jeopardy with that of the EU, with that of US and other countries around the world. Now, he gives an example of the countries that Mr. Murthy had talked about in the interview. He says that in the past 150 years, we have seen continuously the working hours in these countries decline. For example, in 1870, the era of industrial revolution, when it was actually at its boom, it used to be 68 hours a week. Now in 2017, number of working hours in Germany are less than 28 hours a week. In Japan, number of working hours has reduced to 35 hours a week. In fact, you can see around yourself, a lot of countries are now talking about a 4-day work week. Instead of 5-day work week, they're talking about a 4-day work week. And in India, we have a situation where most of the companies, a lot of Indian companies, force their workers to work at least 6 days a week, not even 5. So he says that if you have to take an example of these countries, they are working on the opposite path. Also, the author says that some of the responsibility has to be taken by the industrialists themselves. The responsibility of not investing enough money into innovation. He says that as per the Niti Aayog's India Innovation Index of 2021, the amount of money that India spends on innovation is one of the lowest in the world. In 2018 rather, it was 0.65% of our GDP. This was the amount of money we spent in innovation. 2020-21, it reduced even further to 0.64%. If you look at how much money from this the private sector has contributed in innovation, it is again one of the lowest in the world. So the author is turning the table, saying that rather than asking the youth that you take up the responsibility, the author is asking what have the industrialists done? What has the private sector done to increase the productivity, to increase the concept of India becoming, or chance of India becoming an advanced country? Around the world also, the other countries look at it very, very seriously whether you are implementing international labor standards or not. For example, India, as you know, is a part of US-sponsored Indo-Pacific Economic Framework for Prosperity, where India is hoping to get information and technology exchange with the US. If we have to become a part, or if we have to make sure that we get benefits out of it, we have to comply with the international labor standards. In fact, international labor standards is central to the implementation of such projects. So again, by forcing our youth to work extra, going beyond what they are paid for is not just jeopardizing their own future and mental sanity, it's also going to jeopardize our relationship with the countries that we are looking to have partnerships with. With the EU being extremely serious about the human rights record, about the working condition of the workers, of the countries with which they are dealing, we cannot afford to take a chance. US and EU, they take a lot of, or they give a lot of importance to where the product that they are using is being manufactured. If they think that in their supply chain, there is labor exploitation, there is environmental degradation, there is slavery, there is child labor, etc., they will not buy material or any product from these countries. France, Germany, etc. have made extremely, extremely important laws such as these. So, the idea of Mr. Moti, as per the author, should not be considered, should not be taken seriously, because if it is, it might jeopardize our relationship and our future dealings with a lot of these countries. Now, the article here focuses mostly on the international labor standards. What exactly are these? These are the standards that have to be followed around the world, and they have been prescribed by the ILO, which is a UN agency. Now, the interesting part is, please understand, most of what UN does and UN agencies do, it is all non-binding. It's all non-binding. So, for example, tomorrow, let's assume the government makes a law in India that we are very inspired by what Mr. Moti has said. Now it is compulsory that every job or every working person will have to work 70 hours a week at least. Let's assume the government of India makes such a law. Does it mean that ILO will take some action against us? Not really. Does it mean that the UN will put sanctions on us? Not really. The problem will be that maybe the other countries would not want to trade or deal with India then. But it's not binding. For example, if the ILO says 40 hours of work week should be good enough, if we go beyond that, that doesn't really mean that we will face any action specifically from the ILO, because these are all non-binding. Now, we have ratified this, means it is an instrument which the country agrees to, that yes, we will go and achieve this. The ILO also talks about decent work agenda. It aims to achieve decent work for all. For example, just because a person is working in your factory doesn't really mean that you are just bound to give him or her wages. Apart from that, you also have to ensure decent working condition so that the person can live his life in a decent environment even beyond his or her job. Now, the ILO specifically is a very, very interesting body. Although it is a UN agency, but do you know, even the existence of ILO in fact is older than the UN. The reason being that ILO was initially formed as a part of the League of Nations. The League of Nations was the body that was formed after the First World War. League of Nations was dissolved, UN replaced the League of Nations, but even then, the ILO remained. ILO thus is older than even the UN. India is one of the founding members of the ILO. Do remember with respect to ILO has 8 core or fundamental conventions. Remember, they have 8 fundamental or core conventions. Out of these 8, India has ratified 6 of them. So we agreed to 6 of them. We agreed to these 6. Forced Labor Convention, Abolition of Forced Labor, Equal Remuneration, Discrimination Convention, Minimum Wage, and Worst Forms of Child Labor Convention. These are the 6 that we have also ratified in our parliament. There are 2 that India has not ratified, which are these 2. Freedom of Association and Protection of the Rights to Organize Convention and Right to Organize and Collective Bargaining Convention. These are the 2 that we have not ratified. The reason mainly being that India believes that if we ratify this, that means we are asking our workers, especially the government servants, etc., that you have the right to form your own unions, you can bargain with the government about wages, etc. This is a power that the government of India does not want to bestow on the workers as of now. This was our first article. The second article that we have here is about a recent judgment in the Supreme Court of India, the judgment with regards to the DTAA. Now, let's first understand the idea of what is DTAA, and then we'll go deeper into this article. DTAA stands for Double Taxation Avoidance Agreement. Let's take a simple example here. Let's assume that you are an Indian citizen, and what happened was you worked in a company, let's say Infosys or TCS or any other company, and you are working in the US. You are an Indian citizen working in the US in one of these companies, TCS, etc. Let's say you are getting a salary from the US. Now the question is, who will impose taxes on your salary? The government of India will say that you are an Indian citizen, so we have the right to take income tax from you, so give us income tax. American government will say, but you are earning money from our country, so give the tax to us as well. Now, if as an individual, you have to pay taxes both in India also because you are their citizen and in America also because you are residing in America, that means most or the biggest chunk of your salary will already be gone into taxes. To avoid that from happening, India and US, for example, would sign an agreement called Double Taxation Avoidance Agreement to make sure that there is a proper rule that how much tax do you have to pay in the US, how much do you have to pay in India, or where do you have to pay the tax in one country or the other country. Similar is the example with the companies as well. For example, there is Infosys, an Indian company that has set up an office in the US. They're earning their money from there, they're earning their profit from America. Where do they pay tax? Do they pay tax in India? Do they pay tax in the US? If they pay tax at both the countries, how much tax do they pay? To solve this problem, we have something called the DTAA, Double Taxation Avoidance Agreement. At least this much should be clear to you. Now let's understand what exactly is the issue all about. So recently, there was a case in the Supreme Court of India. The case was mainly the government of India against some European companies, Nestle. Now, what exactly was the case? So let's understand this. India, for example, has a double taxation avoidance agreement. The double taxation avoidance agreement that we have is with many of the European nations. With many European nations, we have this agreement. Now, let's try and understand. There are a few nations involved here. So, basically, Netherlands, France, and Switzerland. With these three, India has a double taxation avoidance agreement. Now, what is this agreement all about? The agreement is, India says that if your companies that are working in India, let's say Nestle is working in India, Nestle is earning profit in India. Let's assume Nestle earns 100 crore rupees of profit in India. Okay? And they transfer this profit to their shareholders in France. Let's say they transfer this profit to the shareholders in France. The agreement that India has with these three countries says that India will cut 10% tax from this. Okay? The agreement that India has with these three countries is, if any of your company, if any of your multinational organization is working in India, they earn the profit from India, let's say Nestle. The profit that they earn, they want to then send it back as a dividend to their shareholders living in those countries, in European countries. India has a right to take 10% tax from this. This will be called 10% withholding tax. Okay? Now what is the problem here? The problem is India also has similar agreements with other countries, such as we have agreements with Slovenia, Colombia, Lithuania. With them, the agreement that we had signed was about cutting 5% tax only and not 10%. Again, recapping. India has a double taxation avoidance agreement with the Netherlands, France and Switzerland. With these nations, we told them, if any of your company works in India, they earn a profit, they want to send the money back to your shareholders, India will put a 10% tax. They said, okay, fine. But before that, India had also signed an agreement with countries such as Slovenia, Colombia, Lithuania. With them, the agreement that we had signed was, we will keep 5% tax from you and not 10%. So now what is the problem here? The problem here is that all of these, Netherlands, France, Switzerland and these other countries, Slovenia, Colombia, Lithuania, they are a part of OECD. They are a part of OECD. So now the problem is India cannot have different rules for individual OECD members. OECD is Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. India had agreed that we will give the same treatment to all the OECD nations. We cannot have 5% tax for some OECD nations and 10% tax for the other OECD nations. India has agreed that we will give similar treatment to all of these. Means India will consider all the OECD members as most favored nation. This is a concept that you might have read in economics. Most favored nation. The idea of most favored nation is, if India, for example, says that Bangladesh is our most favored nation, that means we are promising to Bangladesh that we will not do any discrimination against you. We will treat you in the same manner as we treat all the other countries with which we are trading. So most favored nation tag means no discrimination against you. So these three nations, Netherlands, France, Switzerland, were unhappy that how is it possible that India is imposing 5% tax on some OECD nations while 10% tax on us. So now this case went to the Supreme Court of India. The Supreme Court of India had to decide, is it allowed or not? What is the argument given by the government of India? What does the government of India say to defend this action? The government of India says that the DTAA that we had signed with Slovenia, Colombia, Lithuania, the time that we signed DTA agreement with them, they were not members of the OECD. The time that we had signed these agreements or we signed these agreements, they were not members of the OECD back then. After we signed the agreement, they became OECD members. So we should not be faulted for this. We should not be faulted for this. Because they became OECD members, later on our 5% agreement was signed already. This was the argument that was given in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has decided in favor of the central government. Because Supreme Court has said benefits given to Slovenia were before it became a OECD member, and the same benefits cannot be given to Netherlands, Switzerland or these kind of countries. So they have to pay the additional tax of about 11,000 crores. This is what the Supreme Court has said. The Supreme Court has sided with the government of India, that if the government of India has imposed lower taxes earlier but higher taxes now, this is right, because the earlier countries with which we imposed taxes, they were not members of the OECD at the time that we signed the agreement. So this is what the entire issue is all about. The author here is saying that the Supreme Court is setting a wrong precedent. Why? The author is saying that if you look at how the international law works, internationally, if most favored nation doctrine has been given by the WTO as an international convention, it should be adopted by every country. You cannot pick and choose. You cannot pick and choose that now I will impose 5% tax here, 10% tax there. This becomes a problem. This is where the author talks about the concept of dualism. Now, what do you mean by concept of dualism? Basically, the concept of dualism is if there is an international law that has been passed, it will be followed in India as well, unless we make a law that is contrary to that. Let me give you an example. Let's take an example. Let's assume that at the UN, there is a convention that has been passed. Let's assume there's a UN convention that says that right to abortion should be allowed. Okay? Let's assume there's a UN convention that says right to abortion should be allowed. Unless India makes a law which is contrary to this, India should also follow this international convention. This is called doctrine of dualism. Unless we make a law contrary to that, that should be followed. Supreme Court, however, in this case did not follow this. Supreme Court in this case has gone against this international convention, because the international convention is that once a country becomes a member of a group, once these countries have become the members of the OECD, they should all be treated equally. But the Supreme Court has said that no, we will not treat them equally. We have signed the agreement earlier. This is what the author is pointing out. The author is saying that the Supreme Court is not setting the right example. The Supreme Court has favored the government of India. The government would be happy, but the reality is that it is contrary to what the Supreme Court has said in earlier cases. Vishakha guideline case, the Buddha Swami case that talks about the right to privacy. In all these cases, the Supreme Court had said that we will presume that we will be consistent with the international law. In all of these cases, Supreme Court had earlier said that we will presume that whatever the international law is, we will follow the same in our country unless we have a law contrary to that. But in this case, the Supreme Court has gone against this. As per the author, the government might like it because they would get more taxes under this, but in the long run, this is not a good precedent set up by the Supreme Court. Because see, as a foreign investor coming into India or coming into any country, your topmost priority is you want a tax regime that is fixed, that does not just keep on changing according to what the government or the Supreme Court wants. If the government or the Supreme Court keep on changing the manner in which the taxes are imposed, no investor would be confident about investing in a nation. That is why, as per the author, Supreme Court should not have done this. Anyways, let's also talk a bit about the DTAA, the example that I gave you earlier. This is an agreement that two countries sign to make sure that a multinational company can easily work across multiple nations without paying tax in all these nations. It applies to cases where taxpayers reside in one country but they earn the income in some other country. It also leads to other issues such as a round tripping of funds. It also leads to issues of many nations becoming tax havens, where a lot of nations specifically reduce their tax rates so that the companies can come and set up their bogus shell offices in these countries. To avoid all of this, double taxation avoidance agreements are made so that foreign investors can come into your country, invest their money without fearing about paying taxes in both the nations. This is how the DTAA works to avoid double taxation. The income that you are earning, it will be divided in a manner that is agreed in the agreement. All the agreements can be different. For example, India's DTAA agreement with Singapore can be very different with the DTAA agreement that we have signed with the US. It can be very different with the one that we signed with Mauritius. So it doesn't have to be the same. It can be very different for different nations. depending on how the negotiations actually go on. The next article that we have here is about what is happening in Qatar. I'm sure all of you would have read in the news. If you have not read the news, the background story is in Qatar a few days back, their court has given death penalty to 8 retired Indian Navy veterans who were working there. There is not much clarity that has come out from Qatar. Qatar has not officially told what are the charges, although there are a lot of news reports that tell us about what the charges may be. Now let's try and understand what this issue is. So, see, when you retire from the armed forces, it is very common that people who retire from the armed forces, they work for some consulting firms. So there are a lot of defense consulting firms. For example, across the world, many armed forces work with these consulting agencies to make plans for the future, to give training, to strike deals, etc. So basically the idea is these 8 retired personnel from the Indian Navy were working for a consultancy firm. This defense consultancy firm was hired by Qatar to train their Navy and to work on certain Qatar Navy projects. Now, Qatar has not officially told what are the charges against them, but as per a lot of news reports, the charges are of espionage. So basically the idea is maybe, just maybe, Qatar was working on a project with an Italian company in which they were making submarines for Qatar. And most probably the charges are that these 8 retired Navy personnel from the Indian Navy, they were stealing information of this project under which Qatar was making these submarines, and they say there are news reports that maybe they were giving this information to Israel. This is the charge on them. Again, please, I'm repeating it. Qatar court has not officially told what are the charges. They have been very secretive about this, but this is what most of the media reports say, that this seems to be the case of espionage against them, that they may be giving this information out either to Israel or to someone else about this secret project that Qatar has been working on with its Navy. Now, what is the author here saying? The author here is saying that Indian media is, as always, making a lot of allegations without any proof. The author here says rather than the Indian media criticizing Qatar time and time again, holding news debates at 9 p.m. without even having any facts, he says that it is best for the government of India to talk on a government-to-government basis, to have lawyers involved, and listen to the side of Qatar as well. Let's not assume that Qatar is doing this to maybe get back to us. There are many media channels that have also talked about the angle of Pakistan, that Pakistan has a role to play, etc. The author is saying, rather than jumping on to conclusions, give the benefit of the doubt to Qatar. Maybe they saw something wrong and that is why maybe they took action. Let's not assume that they did something without any reasoning. This judgment of the Doha court came on the 26th of October. These 8 retired Navy personnel worked for a company called Dhara Global Technologies and Consultancy Services. They were consulting with the Qatar Navy to give them training and to support them on the upcoming projects. Now, the interesting part is, although the judgment of the court has come out now, but this is not a very new case. They were in fact arrested in August 2022. So it has been over an year that they have been arrested. Since then, the reports that have come out are about the Italian submarine company that were building submarines for Qatar. Now, there are a lot of speculations in the media. As I said, speculation about maybe the role of Pakistan, maybe the role of other countries here, maybe something happening at the background, maybe Qatar wants to criticize India or whatever. But again, there is no official communication, and the author here says that the government should make sure that the media does not take this matter out of the hands. Also, Qatar is one of those countries that has friendships all around the world. Qatar, for example, is extremely close to the US as well. So maybe for the government of India, the best possible way would be either to go in a very legal manner, follow the procedure, or maybe talk to the US, maybe ask the US to mediate. Because if Qatar has done something so drastic as in giving them the death penalty, there has to be some reason behind it. This is the point of view given by the author here. Many news channels are even suggesting maybe there's the hand of Pakistan. Then some are suggesting maybe Qatar wants to ensure that India, which is undergoing a lot of agreements or which is undertaking a lot of agreement with Israel, Saudi Arabia, maybe they don't come closer, maybe Qatar is jealous of them or whatever. The author says that let's not make all these arguments, let's not make all these allegations, they may not turn out to be true. As per the author, he gives 3 points about what he understands about the situation. He says, number 1, it is a security issue. It has nothing to do with India as in a country. Means they should not be taken as a step of Qatar against India. It's Qatar government against 8 individuals, as simple as that. Let's not make it Qatar versus India. First. Second, he says, during the period of detention, patience and restraint should be called from our media. Rather than the media making the situation even worse, making allegations which are not proven, we should rather follow the rule of law. And third, focus should be on behind the scene diplomatic engagement with Qatar. Make sure that we have diplomats involved, make sure that we take help from countries such as the US to get to the bottom of this issue, share information as much as possible to take action going forward. Now, this is again not a new case, it has been going on for a long time, and again this is not very odd. Retired personnel from the armed forces, they do get into these kind of jobs of consultancy with the defense companies because smaller countries do require a lot of defense training, a lot of defense expertise, and they look toward these consultancy services. So this is not something new that has occurred. Also, this company for which they were working has been shut down now after the arrests were made, very secret arrest for that matter. This company does not exist now, it has been shut down. The next article that we have is about the massive displacement that we are seeing in Democratic Republic of Congo. That is the DRC. Now, if you actually see the Democratic Republic of Congo, I'll first show you the map. So let's look at this map here. If you look at the Democratic Republic of Congo, it's a country that you keep on hearing a lot about. Please remember there are 2 countries by the name Congo. This is the DRC that we are talking about, Democratic Republic of Congo. Then there's another country called Republic of Congo. So these are 2 different countries, so remember that. Also understand that it's a very large country. It's the 2nd largest country in Africa. It shares a border with a lot of countries. The issue in Congo is not very new. We have been seeing these issues. There has been presence of the UN peacekeeping forces in Congo for a long time. It has 2 big problems. First, its internal issues, and second, the problem with respect to the neighboring countries, most specifically with respect to Rwanda. Let's try and understand their internal politics for now. So basically, this part of the world was ruled by Belgium. Belgium controlled over Congo for a long time till 1960s. After Second World War, when they got independence, before that was ruled by Belgium. Rwanda also was ruled by Belgium only. Now, after they got independence, they held elections. They started becoming a democratic country, at least on paper. But in reality, the presidents that came to power were not really democratic. Whichever president used to come to power, they used to make sure that all the opposition parties were suppressed. In 1960s, when they had a first democratically elected president, it turned out to be a dictator. He ruled the country for over 3 decades, suppressing all the opposition. Now, when you have a rule of a dictator in such a vast country, and also a country with a lot of resources, the problem is that there is always a section of the population that will rise up against the dictator. Similar case happened here. Congo again is extremely rich in minerals. It has the world's largest reserves of cobalt. It has a lot of gold also. It has a lot of titanium as well. So again, Congo became a country too large to be governed by just one dictator. And problems started in the eastern part. North Kivu, South Kivu. So this is the eastern part. This is where the problem started. Now, problem also started because of what was happening in Rwanda. Now let's try and understand the role of Rwanda here. So Rwanda, as you can see, it's a neighboring country. Rwanda is extremely famous or infamous for one of the worst genocides in the entire world's history. A genocide in 1994 where about 10 lakh people were killed. There were 10 lakh people that were killed in Rwanda in 1994. These people were killed mainly in the name of ethnicity. So basically, if you look at Rwanda, Rwanda has two groups. Rwanda has about two groups. There's a Hutu group and there's a Tutsi group. Hutu are in the majority. Tutsi are in the minority. In 1994, Hutus started killing the Tutsi. It was one of the worst genocides in the entire world history. In a period of 100 days where the genocide went on, 10 lakh people were killed. A lot of them, to save their life from the Tutsi community, went on and basically crossed over the border to Congo. So Congo right now has a lot of population from the Tutsi community. The Tutsi community that wanted to go to Congo just to save their life. The Tutsi community itself here made sure that they made their own militant groups, and their own militant groups that started operating in the eastern part of Democratic Republic of Congo that borders Rwanda. They then started fighting against Rwanda. So now we have a situation where Rwanda, the government of Rwanda, sees certain problems, sees challenges from rebel groups, Tutsi rebel groups that are operating out of Congo. These countries now have seen multiple groups emerge. In Congo, it is said that the eastern part of Congo is almost out of the control of the government. The government has given up control. There are multiple militant groups that are operating in that part. This is the part which is extremely rich in minerals as well. So they get a lot of money from there. They do make sure that all these illegal mining that is happening in eastern part of Congo, it gives them a lot of riches. They sell a lot of these materials across the entire world. The Tutsi group in Congo have made their own group called M23. M23 is a Tutsi group. The idea of this group is that they will attack Rwanda. They want to basically capture power in Rwanda once again. To resolve this issue of what is happening within Congo, again there's a problem within Congo as well, where the government is fighting against their own rebels. And there's a problem between the eastern part of Congo and Rwanda as well, where Rwanda government is fighting against the insurgents and the militants in eastern part of Congo. Both of these have led to the common people suffering the most. As per the numbers given by International Organization of Migration, there have been about 69 lakh people that have been internally displaced in Democratic Republic of Congo. Internally displaced because they have been facing violence, because they have been displaced from their houses. If they live in mineral-rich areas, they have been displaced there so that they are not in the way of mineral exploration of all these militant groups. There have been multiple reasons why this displacement has occurred. First reason, the ethnic intolerance and insurgency. Again, that has to be connected with the Rwandan genocide of 1994, the genocide of Hutus versus the Tutsis, where the Hutus killed about 10 lakh Tutsis and most of them had to run over, most of them had to come to Democratic Republic of Congo, where they formed their own group called the M23. Second reason, there is political uncertainty and not enough inclusive government. Again, the government has given up hope on the eastern part of Congo. They consider that this is a part that they cannot control. This is a part that will be controlled by the militant groups only. They have given up their powers. People from this part of the country, that is Eastern Congo, they don't get any representation in the national parliament because they are not, elections even are not held in this part. Third, there are regional tensions as well. If you look at the surrounding countries, Uganda, Rwanda, Burundi, Tanzania, Zambia, these countries, especially in the eastern part, also have an important role to play. There have been allegations that Uganda and Rwanda, these kind of countries are making sure that Congo remains very, very unstable. Because they think that if Congo remains unstable, they might be able to acquire some area of Congo. Because this is again a mineral rich area. It's all a mineral rich area. So all these countries want to acquire as much part of Eastern Congo as possible, and that is why they are happy to play the role of an unstabilizing force in this entire region. All of this has led to humanitarian crisis, which has forced the UN peacekeeping forces to remain in Congo for a long time. Now, before I move to a prelims point of view, I have an important and interesting homework for you. Look at this map of DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo. You will realize it shares a border with a lot of countries. See, it shares a border with Central Africa Republic, Congo Republic, Angola, Zambia, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, Uganda, Sudan. The homework that I want to give you is, tell me in the comment section after the video ends, which is the country that shares a border with the largest number of nations? Largest number of neighbors. Which is the country? Or in fact, tell me top 3 countries. Top 3 nations that share a border with the largest number of countries. With it, which is the first one, the second one, and the third one. And also tell me, is Democratic Republic of Congo in the top 3 or not? If it shares a border with so many countries, is it in the top 3 or not? Let's see if you can find this out. Do tell me in the comment section after the video, and we'll discuss this tomorrow as well. Then from the prelims exam point of view, we have a few news stories. First, the Indian Air Force had announced earlier as well that they are in the process of phasing out the MiG-21. The MiG-21 has been prone to a lot of accidents. There have been a lot of crashes of MiG-21. Many promising pilots have lost their lives in these accidents. These are very old now. These are obsolete, and that is why the Indian Air Force has been planning to phase them out. Mostly they will be replaced by Tejas, India's light combat aircraft that is indigenously made by the HAL. That will be the one that will replace most of the MiG-21 fighter jets. Now, MiG-21 fighter jet that we have right now, basically only 2 squadrons are left in service. Apart from that, they will be entirely phased out, and the last of these planes will be in service only till 2025. They will then be replaced by Tejas Mk1A, the first generation, then the second generation will also come in. IAF has already placed an order for light combat aircraft Tejas, 83 of them, that is Mk1A, and apart from that, 97 additional jets will also be bought by the HAL. Now, the MiG-21s, which have been the backbone of the Indian Air Force for a long time, are extremely old now. They have been prone to accidents. They are not the most sophisticated aircrafts going around right now. We have seen so many unfortunate accidents of the pilots losing their life. In fact, the MiG-21s have so far seen about 400 accidents, where about 200 of our experienced trained pilots have lost their lives. That is why the IAF has already started the process of phasing them out. The IAF inducted 2 squadrons of Tejas, 2 squadrons of Rafale also already. They have been included. So the phasing out process has started. By 2025, it will all be completed. Now, there are issues with Tejas as well. See, the problem with Tejas and most of these projects that India has taken up in the field of defense, our speed of manufacturing has been extremely slow. For example, if you look at the Tejas project idea, it was first talked about in 1983. In 1983, when the first Tejas idea was thought of, to the time that Indian Air Force got its hands on Tejas, it has been a very long wait. The problem with this long wait is that a lot of new technology also comes up in the international market. By the time that these aircrafts are made, they may already be obsolete. Indian Air Force may want some new technology to come in. So that creates a lot of problem. However, the good part is HAL, that is Hindustan Aeronautics Limited, is increasing its speed, it's increasing its capacity. They are making sure that they are able to handle all this workload. There have been multiple variants of Tejas also that have been introduced. For example, there are naval variants, there are trainer crafts as well of Tejas that have come out. It's not 100% indigenous, it's about 65% indigenous. Right? The biggest part about any fighter planes is the engine. Once you master the engine, that means you are now good to go to build even better aircraft in the future. That is why the recent deal that India is trying to sign with the US, although it was not successful, we thought that our Prime Minister, when he went to the US visit a few months back, would be able to finalize a deal of the GE fighter aircraft engines, although it was not finalized. If they would have been finalized, it would have been a big boost for us. But in the future, if that deal about the American fighter jet engines being made in India is finalized, we will see an even big boost in the production capacity of Tejas going forward. The next article is an interesting one about how we see the flow of electricity, how electricity is transmitted from where it is made to where it is consumed, that is in our households. What happens in between this? What are the factors that play a major role? So in this article, what we will take up are specific facts which are important from the prelims point of view. For example, facts such as what is the impact of voltage, current, resistance, etc. on the transmission of power. Let's try and understand this. First, see, when you transmit power from any source, there will be certain loss. There will always be certain losses. These are called AT&T losses. So basically, the losses depend on a lot of things. For example, out of the 100% electricity that you are transmitting, at the end destination, you may only get 70% of it or 80% of it. How much loss will there be? Depends on a lot of factors. For example, it depends on current, it depends on voltage, it depends on what material are you using, it depends on the quality of that material. A lot of that will be lost out in the middle. Any conductor, basically, that is used to transmit electricity, ideally it works well at lower current and higher voltage. If you are using higher voltage, that means the loss will be lower. Lower current means the loss will be lower. If you do the opposite, you will see a much higher loss. What does the transformers do? Exactly this. The role of the transformer is to increase the voltage and reduce the current, so that when it goes into transmission line to go to the end consumer, there is not a lot of loss that we see. Then there is a role of the cable as well. The cables that we see, overhead cables with which the transmission actually happens to our place, they also play a major role in deciding how much of this electricity will be lost in between. There will always be some energy loss in the form of heat. They will get heat up and that will be a loss of energy. It also depends on the thickness of the wire. The thicker it is, the less energy is lost. But the problem is when you make it extremely thick, it will also increase the cost. So there has to be a balance between the two. The thicker the wire, the lesser will be the cost, the lesser will be the loss. But the thicker the wire, more will be the cost as well. So you have to see where is the balance. Then the longer the distance of transmission, the lower the transmission cost will be. So if you transmit only for a very short distance, you will see a high cost. But the longer the distance of transmission, the lower will be the cost of transmission. Also, what is the form of current that we are transmitting? It is AC, that is alternated current. So there are two types of current that we see, AC and DC, alternating current and the direct current. So I'll just show you this. This is direct current and this is alternating current. Basically, the alternating current is the one that has a very precise frequency. It is utilized in transmission. It is cheaper to transmit also with much lesser losses. And that is why we usually always see that AC being used, it is being produced and then it is being transmitted to our houses. The most common way of transmitting current is always the AC form. The voltage will flip its polarity. So it will basically go into these kind of opposite poles, positive and negative. The AC frequency, when I say AC here, I mean to say alternate current, not air conditioner. You would have also seen in your household, elders would tell you, parents would tell you, we have a 3-phase connection, 2-phase connection. So basically AC can have a 3-phase connection. It has at least 3 wires. Depending upon that, basically in different wires, there is different voltage that is passed on. There is different way in which the wave actually transmits the current. Rather than going into detail of AC and DC, for your examination point of view, just focus on these 3 pointers. Focus on the result on the energy loss, depending upon voltage, current, the length of wire, the thickness of wire, as simple as that. You should just know what happens to the loss or transmission, or what happens to the efficiency when the voltage increases, when the current increases, when the thickness of the cable increases. If you know that, you are good to go. The last article that we have here is about the WHO Global TB report that has come out, which says that there have been 75 lakh new cases of TB in 2022. Now, when the world was going through the COVID-19 crisis, we saw that since most of the focus was on COVID-19, the other diseases took a backside. That doesn't really mean that TB got eliminated. That doesn't really mean other diseases got eliminated all of a sudden. That just meant that the reporting of the other diseases was much lower. Most of the companies that manufacture vaccines were only focusing on COVID-19 vaccine. They were not focusing on anything else, because everyone's focus was just to get this COVID-19 vaccine right. Now that we have emerged out of COVID-19, the report shows again a very high number of TB growth across the entire world. The WHO Global TB report basically says that out of, if you compare, for example, the number of TB cases that were reported before COVID-19 crisis as compared to now, they're almost at the same level. There has been net reduction from 2015 to 2022 of only 8.7%. The milestone that we were hoping to achieve, the WHO was hoping to achieve 50% reduction by 2025. But that does not really seem to be the case. The number of global cases reported for TB is still 75 lakh. This is the highest number since 1995. Now there are 2 ways to look at it. First way to look at it is bad news, because the TB cases are not reducing. The second way to look at it is at least these are the cases being reported, because most of the cases of TB are not even reported. People don't even get to know, they don't take medicines. That is why many people still die of TB, because they just do not diagnose TB. Once it is diagnosed, it is possible to cure. So more cases being reported is a positive indication that at least we do have more people knowing that they have TB, so that the action can be taken. Countries such as India, Indonesia, Philippines accounted for 60% of reduction in the number of people that are duly diagnosed with TB in 2020 and 2021. In India, the awareness about TB has been increasing considerably. The government of India, in fact, has also started its own programs. We have the National Strategic Plan for Tuberculosis Elimination by 2025. We also have the Nikshay ecosystem, under which we give out as much information as possible about the TB. We provide financial support as well. We provide the medicines that are required. As of now, there are 2 vaccines called Vaccine Project Management and MIP. They have been developed, identified for TB. They are in the phase 3 clinical trial. So we may see vaccines for TB also coming out and rolling out very soon. This brings us to the end of today's discussion. Here are a couple of practice questions which you must write an answer to. Use our student answer writing portal. The link is given in the description of the video. Write answers to these questions, check each other's answers, give feedback to each other. You now have to move over to our Telegram channel, where we'll have a quiz based on the topics that we have just discussed. Reminding you about your homework, you have to tell me in the comment section which countries or which are the top 3 countries that share the border with maximum number of nations, and where does the Democratic Republic of Congo stand. I'll now see you tomorrow for the next session of the Hindu Newspaper Analysis. Have a good day ahead. Bye-bye. Jai Hind.